The younger sister of the golden boy was kicked out of her husband's house for cheating, so her parents convinced me to let her move in, but she started flirting with my husband. So there's a lot of background here, so I'll start there. I'm 25 years old and have a twin sister, Becky. We were very close growing up, but things got really bad when she was a teenager. Becky was a very smart student, while I was quite average. So in 6th grade, she was offered a scholarship to a very prestigious school that only accepted top students like her, and she was eager to accept. But the only problem was that the high school she was supposed to attend was located outside the city. And it would take her more than an hour to commute to and from school every day. We could have let her live on campus, but Becky wasn't happy about that because she didn't like the idea of living on campus. After much deliberation, my parents decided that she could stay with our aunt, my father's sister. My aunt had no children of her own and was not married. My father was always a little uneasy about letting Becky stay with her, as he wasn't sure she could handle the responsibility. But my aunt offered to take Becky in and let her stay with her so that she could go to the school she wanted and not jeopardize her future. So it was that Becky stayed with my aunt for high school, while I continued to live with my parents. She would come back during the holidays and we would visit her. The first few months went well. She would tell us that she was having a great time at her new school because everyone had similar interests and she was finally being challenged. I was happy for her because I wanted her to succeed. I was never the typical jealous child. I just wanted everyone to be happy, and I think that's still the case. So at first, when she told me about her school and her new friends, I was happy for her, and she didn't make a big deal about it. She just casually mentioned it in conversation. But over time, things started to change, and it felt like she was trying to embarrass me and make me feel bad about it for a while. I thought I was being paranoid, but then there were many other negative changes in her behavior, and my parents gradually noticed these changes as well. This made me feel that maybe I wasn't being paranoid after all, that Becky really was having problems. But this wasn't obvious at first glance. It took us a long time to really realize that Becky was becoming more and more different, even a bit worse. At first it was just small things, like every time we visited her, she wasn't as talkative as she used to be, and she always put on a sour face, but we thought she might just be under a lot of pressure with her studies and needed time to adjust. My aunt agreed, and we were satisfied with the explanation. But over time, she would lose her temper at us for no reason, and my parents were told that her grades had slipped. In the year she was in her 3rd year of high school, my parents began to really worry. They had been talking about taking her home for a while, but she flatly refused to go home because she wanted to be with. She thought she would never be able to fit in at the high school I went to, which was an insult to me. If I'm being honest, the final straw was being contacted in the middle of the night by my aunt, who claimed that Becky had stolen a sum of cash and gone missing. The police conducted a search, and half an hour later, she was found trying to buy drinks. Despite being underage, she was let off with a warning, but my parents decided they had had enough and it was time to bring her home. Becky was very upset about this and put up a fierce fight, becoming even more rebellious than before. She often protested, but my parents had had enough and forced her to come home with us and start at the same high school I had attended. They also forced her to undergo therapy because it was obvious that something had gone wrong while she was living with my aunt. At first, we really thought she couldn't compete with the kids at school and finally broke down. Because she was really difficult after she came back. She refused to cooperate with anyone, whether it was our parents or the teachers at school. She spoke badly to her classmates, often skipped classes, and although I couldn't prove it to my parents, I saw her smoking a lot not far from the school. She became the complete opposite of who she used to be. The change was slow but drastic, so my parents of course thought therapy was the best way to go, so we could at least figure out what went wrong when she lived with my aunt. We had originally thought the problem was at school or with bullying, but unfortunately it was with my aunt. Apparently, my aunt is the classic helicopter parent. During therapy, Becky was able to open up and claim that her aunt was really bossy and controlling. Whenever we visited her, she pretended to be normal, but as soon as we left, she would revert to her old ways and try to control every aspect of life. She said she was forced to study every second of the day at home because everything else was obviously a waste of time. When at home, she can't hang out with friends or do anything. She has to study, even at mealtimes. My aunt insists that she watch educational programs instead of something entertaining. This makes her very depressed, so she starts to vent in other ways, but she's also reluctant to come back to us because that would mean giving up her once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She doesn't want to go to a regular public school because that would mean belittling her abilities. Our aunt had told her several times that apparently our grandparents had never recognized her talent or intelligence, and although she was also a gifted child, and because her parents had never recognized her as special and different, they had not treated her differently either, and she had ended up with a boring job that didn't even pay enough to live on. She claims that she could have achieved much more if her parents had invested the time and energy to discover her talents and invest in her. She has instilled a fear of failure in Becky, making her very paranoid, which is why she refused to come home with us the first time. She believed that if she gave up the school, then she would only fail in the future, so she tried to keep up, but the pressure was too much, so she started drinking and secretly went out with friends to release her stress, but she was caught in the process. And now she is back with us. She said she regrets everything, because she gave up a great opportunity to really achieve herself, and now that she knows she is destined to fail, she can't even see the point in trying to do better, and has given up completely. Since then, we have been well aware that our aunt really did cause her a lot of harm, but the worst thing is that, as the years passed, there was hardly any improvement in her behavior. Becky was later diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. I can't say I'm surprised, but to learn that our aunt actually caused her to develop such a serious illness that affected her for the rest of her life. Our parents were obviously very sad, because they blamed themselves for even allowing our aunt to take over and let Becky live with her. However, I don't think it was entirely their fault, as they had noticed all the signs and tried to get Becky to come home, but she refused, and our aunt was very good at pretending to be normal and very good at hiding it from us. We would never have found out unless Becky herself told us about it, and they even sued her to try to get her to pay for the damage done, and eventually won. The money went towards Becky's treatment, as she needed several years of intensive therapy. She barely graduated from high school, but was unable to attend college due to her poor health. My parents didn't want to risk sending her again. She refused to go to community college, so she continued living with our parents until a few years ago, when she started dating a guy named Toby. Our old neighbor sold their house and moved away, and Toby moved in next door alone. He knew everything about her, because our parents felt obligated to tell him when they noticed Becky getting close to him and making excuses to talk to him. He was actually a very kind and compassionate person, and he really seemed to like her. He didn't even care about her diagnosis, and assured my parents that he really liked her and wanted to go out with her despite what he had been told. My parents weren't entirely convinced, but Becky convinced them to let her move in with him. After a few months of dating, it was really helpful that he lived next door, and my parents could drop by any time to make sure she was okay. So they agreed, because it didn't really make sense to keep a grown woman under their supervision all the time. Becky eventually moved in with Toby, and my parents continued to work hard to ensure that she didn't do anything to jeopardize her future and the relationship. They also found her a receptionist job at a friend's startup at the same time, because she was obviously tired of being stuck at home. They found her a receptionist job so that it could be a low-stress starting point for her, and she could eventually work her way up. After almost a year of living together and things going well, they decided to get married. Since they were already living together, my parents agreed, as they thought it would be good for her. She even quit her job and became a full-time housewife. To be honest, being with Toby did bring a lot of positive changes to her life. She even became nicer to all of us, instead of always treating us like enemies and acting as if she could do better without us. So they thought it was a good idea, and she got married 2 years ago. I only got married last year with my boyfriend. We have been together for almost 7 years. We met in our first year of college and have been inseparable ever since. Jack has known about Becky since I first brought him home to meet my family. Becky started flirting with him uninhibitedly. I told him about Becky's diagnosis and said that her behavior might be a little strange, but I didn't expect her to flirt with him right in front of me. It was really inappropriate, and I had to ask her to stop several times until my mother finally got angry with her and told her to go to her room. It was really awkward after that, and we had to explain to him that she was just like that, and that we didn't know what she would say or do because she didn't filter at all. She often said things on purpose to provoke us, and trying to flirt with my boyfriend would definitely get a response, but that was their first interaction, and after that Jack just ignored her. She got bored after trying a few times, but she didn't, and started ignoring him, so they never really got along, and I didn't think they needed to, so I ignored it, but she was invited to my wedding, just like I was invited to hers, because my parents wanted us to at least pretend to be a happy family, even if we weren't, and she was completely charmed by Toby, and once they were together, she started being nice to everyone, so I didn't think that being a family again couldn't hurt. We started off well, having dinner together every month, and we really worked hard to repair the relationship and reduce the discord, and it did pay off because we have made great strides over the past few years. I think we can now call ourselves a happy family, but I think it's too good to be true, because we recently discovered that Becky has been cheating on Toby for the past year or so. We were all shocked when we found out about it, because we always thought that Toby and Becky were the most loving couple in the world, but she had an affair with one of his colleagues. It was a huge scandal. Toby found out about it by chance and immediately filed for divorce because Becky didn't lock her phone when she was around him and didn't lock it when she left the room. Unfortunately, it was then that her affair partner decided to send a text message. I guess she had grown lazy by then because she had cheated on him for over a year and got away with it, and that was probably the reason she slipped up. Anyway, I didn't convince him to take her back, and I don't really blame him because after what she did, who would? During the long divorce process, they decided to sell all their possessions, including the house, so Toby sold the house and split the money between them. Becky lived with our parents for a while after the divorce, but my parents kept asking me to let her stay with me because she complained that my parents' presence made her feel like a complete failure, living with them after her failed marriage. She could have rented an apartment and lived on her own, but obviously my parents didn't want that because they thought she might hurt herself or do something stupid if they let her live on her own. My parents practically begged me to take her in so she could rebuild her life. After a while, I repeatedly refused, feeling it was pointless, so I finally agreed and took her in. I truly felt sorry for her, because every time I went to my parents' house after the divorce, she was just a shadow, like a ghost from her past. It was pitiful to see her like that. I don't think anyone could have continued to ignore the problem. After all, she is my sister, and I owe my family something. At least that's what I thought before I took her in. Shortly after the divorce, she decided to stab me in the back. I decided to talk to my husband about it, and we discussed the living arrangements that Becky and my parents had suggested, and we felt that they were acceptable, because if it helps to boost her self-esteem and make her better, then I fully support it. So we picked her up a few days ago, and it turned out that she messed up in less than a week. She was happy to move in with us, and I could see that my parents were right, that she did want to live with me and not with them. It was a bit strange, because we had grown apart in the years since she left to live with our aunt. It was nice to see that she had finally reconnected with me, and I even thought that we could really rebuild our relationship. I was wrong, and obviously I shouldn't have taken her in. I did it out of the kindness I felt towards my parents and a little kindness towards her too, because we all knew she was in trouble, and I wanted to do something to repair the family bond. It could be considered my saving complex, but I just wanted to help. The day she moved in was actually quite good. We let her stay in the guest room, and she really made it her home. She was lively and cheerful that day, and it was the first time I'd seen her so happy after my divorce. So I was really happy to be able to help. However, things changed after we had been living together for a day. After spending a day in our home, the next day she started picking on silly things like how I decorated my house and what paint I had painted the walls with. It was ridiculous, but I said nothing because it seemed so trivial that I could not stand it. The final straw was during dinner when she decided to start flirting with my husband. I'm not even joking, it was like full-on flirting, and she didn't seem to care at all. I just sat there while she kept asking him strange questions and throwing him winks throughout dinner, and I could tell he was really uncomfortable, and I felt the same way. More than once, she deliberately put her hand on his hand when there was really no need to. I was speechless, and my husband and I left the table as quickly as possible without even finishing our meal. We went back to our room and immediately decided that she had to go. I could not let Becky stay in my house and flirt with my husband. It was impossible. She could only go back to her parents' house to live. If it affected her mental health, then so be it, but it was not my problem because she was not my daughter. I tried to do the right thing for the family and accept her as a crazy person, but obviously people like that can't be changed because they're always ungrateful. I should have known better, but I guess I really felt sorry for her and wanted to make her feel better because she was my sister. After dinner, we had a little chat, and then I called my parents to tell them what had happened. I thought they would be as angry as I was and demand that I send her back immediately. The third time moving back in with her parents was devastating for her, and she would have been. They didn't want her like that and told me to either accept the situation or give her the house and let her move out somewhere else. I don't even know what they meant by letting her have the house, because that's not how things work. You can't just let someone have something that doesn't belong to them, and this applies to husbands and houses. I told my parents that they were being ridiculous and that they would have to take her back, but my parents said that I was overreacting and that it was obviously no big deal because if I just trusted my husband, I would have nothing to worry about. As for my sister, she was going through a very difficult time, and I should ignore all her strange words and behavior and keep her close because as a member of the family, I owed them that and I had to help them out. At that point, I snapped at them and told them that I actually didn't owe them anything because it was their daughter, not mine, and it was their responsibility to take care of her. I did feel like I owed them something, which is why I took her home, but now it's backfired, and I don't want it to continue like this. It just doesn't make sense. My parents and I argued back and forth for a few minutes, and then they told me that either I would find a new home or I would have to put up with my sister, because I had already accepted her, and they would not force Becky to move again because I lacked security. Then they hung up the phone without giving me a chance to respond. My husband and I were very angry, because this was unreasonable, and I couldn't believe that they actually thought it would work. We went back into the living room, where Becky was, and we decided to tell her that her behavior was highly inappropriate and that we would no longer live with her. Her reaction was just crazy. She immediately started yelling at me, accusing me of being jealous of her for the rest of my life. She said that the only reason she wanted to move in with us was because she wanted to be closer to my husband, not to me. Apparently, she had seen the way he looked at her every time we came over, even during and after the divorce. She knew he wanted to make a move, but she was the only one stopping him, so she decided to move in with us to make it easier for him to express his feelings. When she said this, my husband and I were stunned because it was unbelievable. A few seconds later, my husband told her to get out and never come back. At this point, she seemed genuinely surprised because she didn't expect it. She tried to act indignant and said she knew her and that he was just trying to cover his tracks because he didn't want to fall out with me. I lost my temper and shouted at her to get out, and she immediately hit back and told me that she was leaving anyway because she had no interest in us, that we were just a bunch of losers, so she quickly packed her things and left. We have no idea where she went, and afterwards we just wanted to spend the night in peace, so we went to bed, but unfortunately my parents still haven't been able to find her since then. Because she doesn't answer the phone and definitely didn't go to their house, so we basically have no idea where she is. Long story short, my parents blame me for this, and they think that my husband and I caused this situation, which is really unfair. But I do feel a little guilty because if we had been nicer to her, maybe this wouldn't have happened. So, Ada, thank you for kicking my narcissistic sister out of the house. Update 1. Okay, I've been posting here for a few days now, and I just wanted to let you know that we found her. Becky had been staying with a friend outside of town, which is why we couldn't find her, but she's fine, and just as my parents found her, she refused to come back with them because she claims she's already living with her family again and she wants a place of her own. She says she's tired of depending on other people, first Toby and then my parents, so she wants a home of her own. Guess if my parents agreed? Of course, they haven't apologized to me or my husband yet. They just told me all this in a message, saying that I should be grateful that nothing bad had happened to her. They told me that they would buy her a new apartment at the earliest, so that she could save up her own money and start her life again. I don't know why they felt the need to let me know this, but I'm glad they did. Now I know where I stand, and it's clear that my happiness isn't important to them, at least not as far as I'm concerned. They bought her a new apartment, and at least this time they didn't text me about it themselves. I got a bunch of messages from our friends because she's been posting nonstop on social media, and after we kicked her out, she probably blocked all our contact out of embarrassment because of that crazy thing. Anyway, I don't care at all. My friends say I really don't know what she's doing because she's not even worth my time. I tried to be nice to her, but it ended up being a big disappointment. Now I've had enough. I don't want to have anything to do with her anymore. She's not worth the time and energy. I haven't spoken to my parents yet, but I think they still think I'm responsible for the days Becky disappeared, even though nothing actually happened to her, and she ended up moving to a new apartment, just like she wanted. Anyway, my husband and I are doing well, and he is my only family. Update 3. Hey, it's been a month since Becky came over and flirted with my husband before being quickly thrown out of my house. As you know, my parents used their money to buy her a new apartment instead of the alimony money because they wanted her to save it. Apologize to me. I no longer hold out hope that they will apologize at any time. Some people are so selfish and only think about themselves, and I should have known that Becky was actually a narcissist. She should start therapy again, but I won't tell her because she's no longer part of my family. My husband and I are still strong and happy, and that's all that matters to me. My parents and Becky can just go to hell.